fat controller preferred his railway to be mostly steam-powered. But he found diesels could be useful too, because they could tackle any train given to them, whether it be coaches or trucks. While most of the engines had accepted diesels, James, however, had never really liked them. "You're versatile," the Fat Controller would say to them. "Really useful mixed traffic engines." Boko and Bear were proud of this. James, on the other hand, was not impressed. While he was fond of these two diesels, he treated all others with deep suspicion and distrust. "Diesels don't use coal and water," he would say darkly. "How can you trust an engine who isn't normal in his habits?" Visiting diesels sometimes boasted about how special, modern and superior they were compared to the steam engines. Usually, Boko and Bear had to spend the next day soothing hurt feelings. One day, a particularly haughty diesel came from the other railway. When the visitor found that he was to share the sheds with steam engines, he stopped outside in disgust and refused to go any further. "Why on earth does your controller keep such out-of-date ancient objects in service?" he growled rudely. "Dirty, filthy, smoky, slow things! Ah!" "On our railway," the diesel continued smugly, "steam engines are kept strictly in their place and aren't allowed on the main line without special permission." Boko, who was showing the diesel round, eventually lost patience. "Well, stay outside then if you're so proud about it," he huffed crossly. "I'm going to join my friends." "If we're lucky, it'll be cold tonight, and he won't start in the morning," snorted James to the others. "At least someone might want us to be preserved. Who'd need him? Oh, Stuckup." Everyone muttered in agreement. The engines were glad when morning came. They went to fetch their trains as early as they could, and the visitor was left alone. "Ah, that's better," he purred smoothly to himself. "How on earth can an engine get some rest with all this hissing and clanking?" Old Stuckup was so full of self-importance that he'd completely forgotten that he would need to be cleaned and refueled before he went home. By the time he remembered, it was very late indeed. The cleaning equipment and fuel supply were in the section of the shed which was shared by Bear and Boko. "If I go in now while the shed is empty," old Stuckup said to himself, "no one will know I've been." He scuttled forward quickly. A bit too quickly. The rails where Bear and Boko had stood were oily, and when he tried to stop, he couldn't. "Brake blocks and buffers, I'm slipping!" he wailed, as his wheels locked and slithered along. He shut his eyes as, with a despairing whoop of horror, he crashed into the wall of the end of the shed. Soon, Douglas came with the breakdown train to clear up the mess. The diesel wasn't badly damaged, but a dreadful draft came through the hole in the wall. The diesel just seethed in embarrassment as Douglas took him away. Douglas shunted the diesel into the works to be mended, where they found the Fat Controller waiting for him. He spoke severely to the diesel about the accident. The diesel was left in no doubt that he wouldn't be returning to Sodor any time soon. Boko, who was resting nearby, overheard the conversation and chuckled to himself as he set off for home. When he returned, he found the engines discussing the incident. "Ho, ho, ho," chortled Henry. "Old Stuckup came unstuck, did he? I say, Boko, what is it the Fat Controller calls you?" "Versatile," chuckled Boko. "But that isn't what he called Stuckup. I couldn't hear all he said, but I didn't think it sounded very polite." While old Stuckup's accident hadn't affected the engines, for James, however, the incident had only furthered his distaste of diesels. "They're all right," said Henry one day. "Just mixed traffic engines, like you and me." "Mixed up engines, more like," retorted James. "With windows at each end, how can anyone know if they're coming or going?" "I've got 2 cabs," chimed in Toby, "and I get on all right." "You're only a little engine," scoffed James. "If an important engine like me didn't know which way to go, what this railway could come to, I can't imagine." Over the next few days, James became more and more conceited, boasting about just how important he was every chance he got. The other engines tried all sorts of ideas to make him see sense, but nothing worked. "Making out as if he runs this railway on his own," grumbled Henry. "It's disgusting." Fortunately for the engines, James would be silenced sooner than expected. Soon, the weather became damp and misty. Things became much more difficult for the engines on the main line. The mist sometimes got so thick that they had to be careful when moving through the yard near the big station. This, unfortunately, meant bad news for James one morning. He was meant to take a goods train to the other railway, but Thomas was having trouble building up steam, so James had to arrange the trucks himself. He seethed with fury as he banged throughout the yard. His train had long flatbeds with bogie wheels at each end. These helped them to move around tight curves and carry large loads. But they were all just filthy trucks to James. The mist that morning was particularly bad, and the signalman was having a hard time seeing what was happening. James's driver had told him that they would whistle when they were ready for him to change the points. James was just shunting the last 2 flatbeds towards his train when Henry suddenly passed by and whistled loudly. The signalman heard it too and thought it was James saying he was ready. He pulled the lever, not knowing what happened next. One of James's trucks was halfway over the crossing when suddenly, to his horror, it was travelling sideways between the line. "Stop!" cried James. Soon, the Fat Controller came to survey the damage. He knew the accident wasn't James's fault, but he was most annoyed at the damage done to the signal. James was unusually quiet in the sheds that night. The other rangers were relieved to have some peace for a change. "I suppose it must be difficult to know what way to go when you've got two cabs," said a voice. "But to go two ways at once with just one cab, now that really is something." James pretended he hadn't heard. Work continued on the Fat Controller's railway as normal, and the engine soon dismissed the recent annoying, yet somewhat amusing antics on the railway. But for a long time afterwards, the other engines took great joy in joking about diesels and signals in front of James. "I say, Donald," chortled Duck, "be sure to be careful around those signals on the main line." "Aye," agreed Donald. "And," he finished with a wink, "I'll keep an eye out for any devilish diesels on the way." James thought that for proud Northwestern engines, they were being very immature indeed.